This is the business Blackbook, where billion-dollar empires are built and collapse. $1.3 billion vanished, not stolen in a heist, not lost in a crash, laundered through God himself. This is the business Blackbook, where billion-dollar empires are built and collapse. A Catholic banker found hanging beneath a bridge in London, his pockets stuffed with bricks and cash. The police called it suicide. The Mafia called it a warning. And the Vatican called it unfortunate. But here is what nobody told you. The man hanging from that bridge knew everything. He had moved money for governments, for gangsters, for the church itself. And the moment he became a liability, he became expendable. This is the story of Roberto Calvi, God's banker, and the most dangerous financial secret the Vatican ever tried to bury. But before we talk about the man, we need to talk about the machine. Because the real scandal here was not one corrupt banker. The real scandal was that the most morally authoritative institution in human history had quietly built one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations the world had ever seen. And they did it with the blessing of the Pope. Let us go back. Way back. The year is 1929. Italy is under Mussolini. The Vatican has spent decades without a country to call its own. And then, a deal is struck. The Lateran Treaty, signed between Pope Pius XI and the fascist dictator himself. The terms were simple. The Vatican becomes a sovereign state. The Church gets political independence. And in exchange for centuries of lost property, Mussolini hands over 1.75 billion lire, cash and government bonds. That payment became the foundation of the Vatican's modern fortune. And to manage that fortune, the Church created a bank. Not just any bank. The Istituto per l'Opera di Religione, the Institute for Religious Works, known to the world simply as the Vatican Bank. Its official mission was spiritual, managing funds for religious charities, caring for God's money. Noble, sacred, untouchable. But here is the detail that changes everything. As a sovereign entity, the Vatican Bank operated completely outside Italian law. No taxes, no audits, no transparency, no oversight from any government on earth. It was the perfect offshore bank, hidden not in the Cayman Islands or Luxembourg, but right in the heart of Rome, behind 2,000 years of moral authority. And nobody questioned it. By the 1960s, the Vatican Bank had quietly become one of the most secretive financial institutions on the planet. It could move money anywhere, for anyone, with zero accountability. And as the Cold War intensified, that kind of secrecy became extremely valuable. Enter Banco Ambrosiano, a respected Italian bank, Catholic in culture, connected to the Church, and run by a man named Roberto Calvi. Now, Roberto Calvi was not what you would picture when you imagine a criminal. He was devout, charming, brilliant. He attended Massachusetts. He was celebrated in Catholic circles. He was known as a man of vision, a man of faith. What nobody knew was that behind that faith was a mind capable of engineering one of the most complex financial frauds in modern history. Calvi saw something in the Vatican Bank that others had missed. Not a spiritual institution, a tool, the most perfectly protected financial tool in the world. And he decided to use it. Here is how the scheme worked. Pay close attention, because this is the part the Vatican spent decades trying to make you forget. Calvi built a network. Dozens of offshore shell companies scattered across Luxembourg, Panama, Nassau, South America. On paper, independent businesses. In reality, ghost entities. Paper ghosts with bank accounts and nothing else. Calvi would arrange massive loans from Banco Ambrosiano to these fake companies. Hundreds of millions of dollars. The Vatican Bank would then sign letters of guarantee. Official letters. On Vatican stationery. Signed by the head of the Vatican Bank himself. Promising to cover the debt if the borrowers defaulted. But the borrowers did not exist. The companies were empty. The loans were constructed lies. The money would vanish into offshore accounts, reappear through layers of intermediaries, and quietly fund political causes, covert operations, and organized crime. Billions moved this way, silently, invisibly, under the banner of religion. And the man signing those Vatican guarantees was Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American priest from Chicago, 6'2", built like a linebacker. They called him the gorilla. He was personal security for two different popes. He was untouchable inside Vatican walls. And he was Roberto Calvi's most important partner. Together, they had not built a bank. They had built a shadow financial system, operating in the space between God and government. But who was the money actually for? This is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Some of it went to Solidarity, the Polish labor movement led by Lech Walesa, the movement that would ultimately crack Soviet control over Eastern Europe. The Vatican and Western intelligence both wanted communism stopped, and money was the weapon. But not all of it went to noble causes. Some of it funded right-wing regimes across Latin America, black market arms deals, heroin routes managed by the Sicilian Mafia, political kickbacks flowing into the veins of Italian democracy itself. And Calvi sat at the center of it all, the man who knew where every lira went, the man who could destroy governments, reputations, and the church's moral standing with a single ledger. That made him powerful. For a while, on page 7 of the ledger, we find a name that does not belong in a church. Propaganda do. P2. A secret Masonic lodge operating beneath the surface of Italian society. Its members included military generals, secret service chiefs, politicians, financiers, and Roberto Calvi himself. P2 was not just a lodge. It was a parallel government, a shadow network connecting Italy's most dangerous and most powerful men. And it had deep ties to both the Mafia and Western intelligence agencies. Calvi was their banker. He moved money for all of them. And they protected him. Until they didn't. The cracks began in 1978. Italian regulators had been watching Ambrosiano. Quietly. Carefully. And what they found alarmed them. Enormous sums were leaving Italy without authorization. The offshore network was too large to hide forever. Calvi was arrested, convicted of currency violations, sentenced to prison, and then, mysteriously, released pending appeal, reinstated as chairman, as if nothing had happened. His power seemed immune to consequences. But the numbers were getting worse. By the early 1980s, Ambrosiano's foreign loans had outgrown its actual capital by over $1 billion. The entire structure was starting to buckle under its own weight. Calvi began to panic. He wrote desperate letters. He begged the Vatican for help. He even wrote directly to Pope John Paul II, warning him, telling him that if Ambrosiano collapsed, the Church's secret financial operations would be exposed to the world. His plea went unanswered. The silence from Rome was the answer. On the 17th of June, 1982, Roberto Calvi fled Italy under a false passport. He carried cash and documents that allegedly detailed the Vatican's direct involvement in the scheme. For 10 days, he disappeared. Then, on the 27th of June, a passerby on Blackfriars Bridge in London looked down beneath the scaffolding and found him, hanging, pockets filled with bricks, $15,000 in cash on his body. Dead. The authorities ruled it suicide. But something did not add up. The Blackfriars, the Dominican order, a nickname also used by members of Propaganda Do. Was the location a message? A warning to everyone who knew what Calvi knew? His personal secretary, Graziella Carroccio, had already fallen from the Ambrosiano headquarters in Milan. Days before his death, another suicide. Officially, within weeks, Banco Ambrosiano collapsed entirely. One of Italy's largest private banks, gone. And the trail of missing money led investigators straight to one address. Vatican City, The Vatican's response was immediate and predictable: denial. Archbishop Marcinkus went on record: the Vatican Bank had no involvement in Ambrosiano's debts. None. The idler was merely a passive shareholder. Nothing more. But investigators had the letters, signed by Marcinkus himself, on Vatican stationery, guaranteeing loans totaling hundreds of millions of dollars to companies that did not exist. Italy's prosecutors moved to indict him. And here is where sovereignty became a shield. Marcinkus retreated behind Vatican walls. And under the terms of the Lateran Treaty, the one signed with Mussolini over 50 years earlier, Italian law could not reach him. He could not be arrested. He could not be extradited. For 7 years, he lived inside Vatican City, playing the waiting game, immune. Meanwhile, forensic accountants were tracing the money through shell company after shell company. Every trail led deeper into darkness. Connections to the Sicilian Mafia, South American death squads, Cold War weapons operations, political financing that reached into the Italian government itself. The Vatican had not just been a bystander. It had been the engine room. By 1984, the pressure had become unbearable. The Vatican quietly negotiated a settlement, $250 million, paid to Ambrosiano's creditors. Not an admission of guilt. Officially, a goodwill payment. But the message was crystal clear. Silence has a price. Pope John Paul II issued a statement calling the crisis a grave sorrow. And behind closed doors, the Vatican's financial machinery was quietly restructured. New faces, new rules, new language, same institution. Marcinkus remained in charge of the Vatican Bank until 1989. He then retired quietly to the United States. Spent his remaining years in Arizona, playing golf. He was never charged with a crime. Roberto Calvi's death was officially a suicide, until forensic re-examination decades later told a different story entirely. His neck injuries were inconsistent with hanging. He had been strangled elsewhere and suspended beneath the bridge after death. He had been murdered. British courts reopened the case in 2003. 5 suspects, including known Mafia figures, stood trial. All acquitted. Insufficient evidence. But testimony confirmed what the world already suspected. Roberto Calvi had not taken his own life. He had been silenced because he knew too much. And the people he knew it about had the power to make evidence disappear. This is where the lesson becomes uncomfortable. Because the Ambrosiano scandal did not end in 1982. 1993, Vatican officials were caught in a $500 million money laundering case tied to political kickbacks. 2010, Italian prosecutors froze Vatican Bank accounts linked to suspicious cross-border transfers. 2013, Pope Benedict XVI resigned, the first pope to resign in nearly 600 years. Internal leaks exposed corruption and financial infighting within the Curia itself. The Vatican's own watchdog described the IOR as a possible conduit for illicit funds. The same institution, the same patterns, decades apart. Pope Francis pledged reform, brought in outside auditors, passed new transparency rules, replaced senior officials. But the Vatican Bank today still manages billions in assets, still operates outside any national jurisdiction, still answers only to the Pope, still has no public shareholders, no public reporting. It remains, to this day, a sovereign offshore bank, operating at the intersection of faith and secrecy. So what is the real lesson here? It is not that priests became criminals. It is not simply that power corrupts. Those are easy answers. And this story deserves a harder one. The real lesson is this. The Vatican did not build this machine out of evil. It built it out of survival, out of the belief that the mission, stopping communism, funding the church, preserving moral order, justified the methods. And that logic, that the righteousness of the cause purifies the crime, is the oldest and most dangerous idea in human history. Every empire that has ever collapsed under the weight of its own exceptions, the rules it made for others, but refused to apply to itself. The Vatican's sovereignty gave it the same protection that modern billionaires seek in offshore tax havens, the right to operate above the law. And for decades, it worked, until one banker knew too much, until one body appeared under a bridge, until the numbers no longer added up. Because here is the final truth of the Blackbook. You can hide money in offshore accounts. You can hide it in shell companies, in Vatican vaults, in Cold War operations classified for 50 years. But you cannot hide it forever. The ledger always comes due. And with that, the Blackbook closes. Subscribe, and we will open the next page soon.